once again, gonna go over some comics, not in that much depth. Very disappointed. And there's another stack here that I think are excellent. In fact, one of them is the best title to read in comic book form today. So right off the bat, the Ultimate Comics line, I gave it a chance, checked out the titles, and then with Ultimates number 2, I think this is over. Just, for the most part, the problem was they were so boring. You know, they're not going anywhere. You would think Ultimates was, and I guess it is, but after number 2, which it really is a number 2, the story, capitalism bad. All of a sudden they're attacking the White House, and the ultimate twist is to introduce the Ultimate Universe version of America Chavez. She's got a new suit and everything, but she was being used as a power source and exploited. Gee, I wonder what that's allegory for. The evil capitalist in an original Iron Man suit attacks them in the White House, which, I don't know, the White House. There's no United States of America anymore in this version of the Ultimate Universe, but whatever. It's just, once again, supposedly a political campaign ad, if you will, from the writer, shoehorned in a story that was already bad to begin with. There's very little setup for what takes place here. And discovering America Chavez, they just sort of stumbled into that. So it's really, really stupid. And then the political crap, especially in light of recent events, really makes this 100 times worse. Of course, they didn't know this would happen, but nevertheless, it's the kind of thing that is one of the first rules you never want to cross in your adventure fantasy stories and the like. Don't kick your audience out of the story. Well, that's all this does. But in this case, it was a bad story to begin with. It's just really awful. The artwork is rather adequate, but it's not up to par to past efforts for the Ultimates and that sort of thing. But that's about the only good thing in it. And I think this one did it for me. I don't know that I should bother with the Ultimate lines anymore. Spider-Man is boring as all get out. It never really gets anywhere. They finally had some action, but even that was kind of stupid. The reveal to Mary Jane, it was terrible, really. I was stunned at how bad it could get. And again, just really boring and slow. The X-Men title is just weird and doesn't come across as an X-Men title at all. And I was intrigued by it, sure, but it's the kind of thing that a little sweetheart story like that could have been done in one issue, a one-shot. And I don't think it ever was going to be anything akin to the X-Men. So no point in pursuing that anymore either. The only title that showed any promise was Black Panther. But it's just a Black Panther story. It's like you could have done this in the Black Panther proper title. You know, they changed his costume up a bit, not for the better, really. Then, you know, there's things, he's married to Okoye and all that. Storm shows up, but, you know, just because. And it's got its own, it's the only of the titles where it has an actual narrative and plot going somewhere. Not too crazy about this take on Moon Knight where Khonshu and Ra are actually there and doing all this stuff. But it is the only, there's an actual story, there's an actual adventure going on and that sort of thing. But only just, you know, it's you know, if I never read another, will it bother me? No. You know, it doesn't really hook anything in. But it's the only one that tried. So I'll give it that. But at this point, this is a couple of issues in, and nothing has really lit the fire of excitement. The interest in Spider-Man is Mary Jane and Peter Parker are back together. He gets a family life and all that. But they really didn't seal the deal on Peter Parker's motivation to be Spider-Man. He lives in a world where it never happened. And then, young Tony Stark sends him a message. Hey, this guy screwed up time. You were supposed to be a superhero. And in the Ultimate Universe, he would have died by now. But nevertheless, your real life was stolen from you. And so he's in his 30s. He's kind of getting bored with life. And he's got this chance to go play. Which is a good explanation as to why nothing happens here. He's got Harry Osborn as the Green Goblin coming in and telling him, hey, we got to take down the forces of evil. And that's the motivation for Peter Parker. I mean, in this world, Uncle Ben's alive, but Aunt May did die as through the machinations of the Maker. And so you could say that could be a motivation, but it really isn't up front here. The motivation for the original Spider-Man story took place in a backup story in an anthology comic book that was canceled. Stan Lee and Steve Ditko did that, and it was solid, and it worked, and look what it created. Here, it's just spiraling around. So I think, the experiment, the initiative, I understood it. I had high hopes for it, but that's the problem with hopes these days. They're almost always dashed. So I gave it a shot. I think it's over. As far as, the Ultimates and stuff, it was probably just really pissed me off. Done with that crap and that sort of thing. But it turns out this author will be a part of the DC Absolute line. Gonna do Martian Manhunter, and I intended to give a shot to all those titles so I would check them out. As a result of this, I think I'm going to pass on the Martian Manhunter title. So that's that. Fool me once. Oh, well, what are you going to do? Speaking of DC, they've launched their Absolute Power, written by Mark Waid, once again in light of recent events, which I have struggled to look the other way on and, separate the artist from the art, which he is very capable. He can do that. World's Finest has been really good. But man, I don't know that I can bother dealing with the Absolute Power series. The first issue, I read it, and it's, it's okay. It's not that spectacular. But it is their latest attempt at a reboot, and will apparently introduce the Absolute comics universe and all that. All the more reason to keep up with it. But man, is it so hard. One of the few bright spots of ongoing mainstream DC Comics titles is Green Lantern. Well, once again, he's interrupted by this stupid Absolute Power story. There's still something of a good narrative here, especially since he and Carol are reunited, and it plays in to his motivation, despite that he doesn't have his ring and no powers, but he's able, through sheer force of will. And there's a scene here where it pretty much gives you an idea of probably what's going to happen in the next issue, with Alan Scott making an appearance, and somehow he's able to overcome an Amazo robot that's absorbing his powers, but through sheer force of will, which is willpower, is the heart and soul of a Green Lantern's power. If you have a powerful willpower, power, you can control the ring. And so that comes into play. And then, of course, Hal Jordan, I'm sure, will do the same. But it has to be a tie-in. So just like Night Terrors gets interrupted by this crap. and a pivotal moment of the reunion of him and Carol Ferris from the previous issue. Meanwhile, Carol's poor fiance, who doesn't even know if she's alive or not, apparently it will now become a supervillain, which is typical of these things. But suddenly he's got a full outfit and all that. And there's several vignettes through the title telling you, hey, what's going on with the Absolute Power's story and all that. So it interrupts the Green Lantern story. The only thing that really mattered, and of course it did matter. I mean, I'm sure Carol's ex-fiance will become probably a recurring villain of some sort. But then Theros he plays a role in Absolute Power, but it's rather minor compared to the three main ones. But more of his stories unfolded, and there's a really good little backup story of him and detailing his past. So it's not too bad, but it's interrupted and interfered with Absolute Power, and that's unfortunate. But all in all, it's a pretty good issue. Finally, the House of Brainiac, which I jumped the gun and didn't read this before Absolute Power, but ultimately it comes to a conclusion, and it's all right, you know. And then of course, the Queen of Brainiac survives, of course, so she can become part of the Amanda Waller onslaught to the superheroes. And so there's a redemption of Lex Luthor, and then there's a price to pay for him for what he does, and I'm sure they'll follow that. But it's also probably a means by which they'll get him back to classic Lex Luthor, and he'll be an a-hole again. But he's quite the hero in this story, and I suppose it could be one of those things like they did with Joker in the Bizarro story, where Superman will always know that Lex Luthor could be a good man. But it's been lost, and that sort of thing. So all in all, it's okay. Of an overall reboot series, they probably should have gone with Brainiac, you know, that this could have led to something else, and then you do your reboot and start over, and clean out the trash. But again, Green Lantern, even with the interference, was still probably a little better than this one, but not too bad. The artwork is excellent, although in some scenes where Superman's face is front forward, he almost looks like a guy who had dentures but didn't put them in. I don't know what that's about, but other than that, it's okay. Meanwhile, over at Marvel, of course, Moon Knight had been one of the solid ones. Of late, it's sort of fizzled after Moon Knight's death, but still, you had all these vampires involved in the Midnight Mission, which basically this is called the Midnight Mission. It's not Moon Knight anymore. And then they had this big blood hunt event, and you would think, wow, boy, this is really going to tie into these vampires. Not really. I mean, there's vampires everywhere, and they're fighting them because they're good vampires and all that. And but it's still more of the self-reflection narratives they've been doing. They just eliminated the therapist. This time, the whole thing is narrated by what's her name? Her here. Forgetting her name. But she's trying to save this guy who's holed up in his apartment, but she's already admitted that she's a vampire. He doesn't trust her. And through telling her story, the events that occurred here during them fighting the vampires, the guy is convinced to accept her offer, and she saves him. So anyway, it's just sort of okay, but it's really fallen far afield, and Blood Hunt just interferes with it. Much like Green Lantern, but Green Lantern is still a much better title at this point. So, where is it going? I don't know. I'm sure they'll find Mark Spector somewhere buried and suffering amnesia or something. Anyway, that's that for those titles. So, what about the good ones? Well, probably a good idea would be to just abandon the mainstream altogether and go into independent titles. Mark Miller has done a lot of good work, and look forward to his new endeavors. But another contender is Ghost Machine, and Redcoat, of course, the art is absolutely excellent. He's managed to garner all the great artists for his titles, that being Jeff Johns, of course. And Redcoat's turning out to be quite an intriguing title about this man who achieved immortality and a bunch of people who want it back from him, and a weird, mythological take on American history and that sort of thing, through the eyes of a former British soldier, but quite just a rogue, really. He just accidentally stumbles into this stuff and really has no idea what's going on. But anyway, it's interesting, and of course, it's all connected to the overall narrative of the Ghost Machine stories, and that'll be cool to see how that plays out. Hopefully, there's a good payoff for it, but also something that establishes that these series can continue in their own narratives. So this one it's fun. He's one of these, an a-hole, but somewhere in there is a heart of gold. Yeah. So that's pretty good. The other one, Rook Exodus, is very weird, but it's intriguing in its narratives, and the weirdness of it, of them developing these helmets by which they control the animal population of this colony that has failed, and now they're at war with one another over who gets to run it, and some believe they can restore the power source to maintain the, I guess, overall terraforming of the planet. It apparently is not capable of sustaining life on its own, and the corporation that started this gave up and left. And of course, the main character was thinking, well, we need to leave too. That's not going to happen now. And also, his friend got killed. There's a guy collecting all the helmets, and he wants absolute power over this planet. So, the war is on and ensues. And of course, there's already desire for revenge and whatnot. Meanwhile, they're supposed to be in control of the animals, but it's looking more and more like the animals are in control of them. So there's also that element to it. So it's got a lot of levels to it, and it's kind of a new take on there's been science fiction stories about colonies and all that sort of stuff, but this is quite an interesting take on it. And once again, the art is amazing. So it's a cool sci-fi romp, and I'm enjoying it. And I'm not sure if this is considered part of the other Ghost Machine titles and that they're connected, and this is just something in the very, very distant future from the rest of them. But I noticed the little, the checkerboard things at the top. Rook doesn't have that, so I don't know if that's a signal that, this is its own universe or what have you. And don't expect a Redcoat to show up with Rook, because theoretically he could. He's immortal, so there is that. Meanwhile, back at DC, and this is true of Marvel, the best titles you can get are these out of continuity titles, and Gotham Gaslight by Gotham. Gotham by Gaslight, Kryptonian Age, is very intriguing, and this one does a little better than even the first one. And there's, and he's like, well, where are they going with this? And what's this about? And will Superman appear? And so on and so forth. And that's all well and good and fun. And of course, it's an Elseworlds tale, and that's your best bet, really, on DC stories and that sort of thing. So far so good, and we'll definitely keep up with this one. So finally, best of the best now. Even World's Finest can't, and even if Mark Waid could behave and rein in his psychosis, No chance of that. Conan the Barbarian would still be the best comic book title out there. It is raw, brutal Conan the Barbarian stories. And there is the sister Savage Sword of Conan. The stories are great. The art hasn't really appealed to me that much. It's not reminiscent of the original series that Marvel published years ago. And I followed the black and white magazine way more than I did the comic book back then. And I don't know, the printing, it's cool that the printing is on the old paper and stuff, but for some reason, some of that, it doesn't translate well in how the art is done. Hopefully that'll get better in time. But the main comic book has just been absolutely fantastic, and especially when Delatorre is the main artist. Doug Braithwaite is a fantastic artist, but man, as I can't stop saying it, how much this guy is able to channel John Buscema in the art. And to me, that's Conan. That's just, it's a personal thing. I mean, that's what my introduction to Conan was, the comic books and that sort of thing. And this is a strange, bizarre story. And of course, it involves sorcery and whatnot. And Conan goes up against his ultimate nemesis of Thulsa Doom. And it's great. It's just so damn good. And even with the weird time travel in Conan, but there's an explanation for it. There is sorcery and there are gods in the world of Conan and all that. And it plays out very nicely. And it's not over yet, as he's having to deal with this evil force in the form of this black stone. So, really cool. And some might say, hey, Thulsa Doom looks an awful lot like Skeletor. Well, you got that wrong. You see, Skeletor looks like Thulsa Doom. Doom, I'm sorry. And that's because originally the toy line was supposed to be Conan the Barbarian toys. And they decided, well, Conan's a little rough for kids, so they came up with Masters of the Universe. And it went off in its own direction. It's more science fiction type stuff with fantasy elements, meshed with it. And so the ultimate villain still looked like Thulsa Doom, but he became Skeletor, and is a very different guy in that respect. But nevertheless, Thulsa Doom's skull-faced head was always an element from the get-go when it comes to Conan. So do yourself a favor for raw, brutal, savage adventure. You can't go wrong with Conan the Barbarian from Titan Comics. All right, there we go. It's good to end on a good note, despite the incredible disappointments of the Ultimate Comics and what they have wrought, and the unfortunate idiocy of the likes of Mark Waid and quite a few people in the industry over something that's blatantly obvious of what you shouldn't do. But turn around and lecture everyone else on behavior. Well, it's just one too many. So I guess it'll be, if anything, from mainstream out of continuity stuff. But for the most part, going to be reading a lot of Ghost Machine, Mark Millar books, and of course, Conan the Barbarian. And then, of course, old comics. We'll be reviewing those. Do old comics and mostly have a good laugh at them for the Sunday show, but those are public domain. The ones that aren't public domain, I'll do a few snippets of on this show from time to time. So anyway, there you go. That's what I read this week for the Mr. Nailsin Wednesday Comics.